Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.
Hello, welcome to Autobiography of Yogi Line by Line. Today we're doing Chapter 9, Part 4. I'm with Mike and Chris. How are you guys?
Very well, thank you.
Very well, thanks.
Good.
See, Mike and I got the dress code memo pretty quick.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I pointed it out last time in mine, and now I've like mine.
We're wearing professional tees. And, yeah, pretty important.
Tech tees.
Yeah, tech tees. Yeah.
Alrighty. How's the difference between a software engineer and a traditional? Like Mike.
Are you setting up a joke now, or? No?
This joke.
I mirror match, so I recruit techies. Look like techies.
Yeah, you fool them to thinking that you're one of them.
Exactly, yeah. Informations.
So this section of the autobiography really is about Ramakrishna Paramahansa, Divine Mother, and the Kali Temple. So it starts with, let us go tomorrow to see Dakshineswar. The Master Mahashaya tells Mukunda, and he says that that temple is going to be forever hallowed by his guru, i.e. Ramakrishna Paramahansa. And here, this first time, I think, in this chapter, Master Mahashaya is confirmed by Paramahansa Yogananda as a disciple of Paramahansa, as a disciple of Ramakrishna Paramahansa. So Master Mahashaya was a disciple of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, and he describes him as Christlike. So two elements there I want to discuss to start with. First of all, Ramakrishna Paramahansa, we mentioned him in the first three parts of this chapter that we've gone through, but today we'll do it in a bit more detail. Mainly because he's mentioned a couple of times in this section that we're going to read. Firstly, Guruji's praise of him, an elevated status, putting him in on quite a pedestal, calling him Christ-like. And secondly, then later Master Mahashaya also, praises him and says, "My master said so." He's basically saying everything he does is, at the wish of his master. So that's why we're going to spend a bit of time on Ramakrishna Paramahansa, and also, essentially, it's a bit relevant actually to Self-Realization Fellowship. There's some links there for us that I think we might find interesting. So firstly, we have Ramakrishna Paramahansa. So he is born as Gadadhar Chatterjee, who is an Orthodox Brahmin. And apparently he had, if you read the Gospel of Ramakrishna Paramahansa by Master Mahashaya, he has actually had quite a few mystical experiences. And this is a case in point where I remember my sister just recently, I think she's finished now reading the autobiography after I gave it to her many years ago. She said, "Oh, there's so many miracles," and she obviously I could sense she didn't really resonate with that. And then I thought, oh yeah, there is, just true. We're used to it, aren't we? Having read it many times, we got over that first shock. But if you read this Ramakrishna Paramahansa's essentially biography by Master Mahashaya, there's just as many magical, miraculous events, very mystical things. And I've noticed in the lives of the great saints of India and the gods in India, that mysticism is like much, much more rife than lives of the saints of the East, the Middle East and the West, if you could call it that. So India, for some reason, is inextricably linked to a lot more mysticism than other saints. But we just have to acknowledge that exists, and not just in Self-Realization Fellowship, but actually in many, many paths in India. So, let's talk about Ramakrishna Paramahansa. As we mentioned, he was born entitled Gadadhar, and his father died when he was young, and he and his brother took responsibility for the family. And as they were Brahmins, they could essentially have a career as pundits for various occasions. And he was promoted to serve at the Dakshineswar temple, and because of his very profound aura and his capabilities to summon Divine Mother, everyone started considering him as quite divine, an avatar, as it were. So he was made head priest of the temple, Mahakali Dakshineswar temple. Mike?
I just had to think of Bhagavati, whose dad also died very early, and then he had to take responsibility. And maybe that kind of is something and we are always looking for parallels in the life of saints, and that seems to be a theme sometimes that makes them have to take responsibility really early on, right?
Good point. Good point. And as a priest, he had a lot of mystical experiences, which are described in the book in a lot of detail. I mean, there was instance where he would, he would merge essentially with Krishna. And I described how he gave earlier in different previous episode how he gave the Krishna darshan to one of his devotees, and then he's had instances where he become a Shiva essentially, and then Christ as well. He experiences Christ and Divine Mother. There's stories of we're going to get to that later, but there's stories where she would literally eat out of his hand, and the food would disappear. So there's lots of ecstasies that Ramakrishna Paramahansa or Gadadhar experienced, and his wife also became a great saint, Sarada Devi, and she also has some links to young Mukunda. Actually, he went and sought her darshan. We'll talk about that a bit later. Another link for us. So Mukunda. So we in the previous chapter, at the start of this chapter, Mukunda had this violent reaction, if you remember, when he was confronted by Master Maharsha speaking to Divine Mother, and he said he had the most violent reaction that he had in his life, essentially. And now Gadadhar, let's hear some of his experiences in childhood. Mike, if you'd be so kind just to read a small section for us.
At the age of 7, Gadadhar had his first experience of spiritual ecstasy. One day, when he was walking along a narrow path between paddy fields, eating the puffed rice that he carried in a basket, he looked up at the sky and saw a beautiful, dark thundercloud. As it spread, rapidly enveloping the whole sky, a flight of snow-white cranes passed in front of it. The beauty of the contrast overwhelmed the boy. He fell to the ground, unconscious, and the puffed rice went in all directions. Some villagers found him and carried him home in their arms. Gadadhar said later that in that state he had experienced an indescribable joy.
Pretty insane thing to happen to a young boy, isn't it? But it's these signs actually that presage a divine life. In India, if boys exemplify or have these kind of experiences, not just really profound ones such as this, but in devotional temperaments, like if they can sit in front of the family altar and unmoving, and as Mukunda used to, these are all signs that Indian families would very much be pleased to see, as would anyone with any parent with a spiritual appetite. So it's quite a nice story there from the book, and we'll get to more of those a bit later. The other thing, Chris?
It is really thought-provoking, isn't it? Why this occurs, because we talk about it a lot. Where is God? Or the analogy might be the fish is looking for the water. It's kind of it's in there, it's everywhere. You're looking. It's imperceivable maybe to the goldfish in its current state of consciousness, let's say, which maybe is what it is for us. Like Yogananda was basically begging for an intervention to have a great saint speak to Divine Mother on his behalf, but really here it is, maybe this individual Gadadhar was ready to see it in that moment, and it's everywhere. So it's everywhere. It just really is thought provoking.
The other small thing that I'd like to mention in this is that he describes Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa as a Christ-like master. Now, Mike, before I mention that, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that sometimes saints, they have those spiritual experiences and they don't share them most of the time, I think. But in this case, it caused him to faint and other people had to pick him up. So it became a public scene, right? And that's why he had to share it. So I guess it was also meant to be shared with everyone like that.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Saints are usually reserved characters, aren't they? That don't want to blow their own trumpet. So, yeah, Christ-like. So this is something interesting because Ramakrishna Paramahansa actually had some influence, I would say, in the spreading and the acceptance of Christ amongst the Hindu community in India. So in the late 19th century, I would say the contemporaries of Ramakrishna Paramahansa and the people that he influenced certainly started acknowledging Christ, accepting him as spiritual master, and then that kind of spread across religions, across communities, up to we're going to talk about it later, up to our paramgurus, because Lehi Mahashaya was obviously a contemporary of Ramakrishna Paramahansa as well. So the little bit about the history I thought I would mention. So Ramakrishna Paramahansa, his principal devotee is Vivekananda. Vivekananda and Master Mahashaya were brother disciples, and they both actually belonged to an organization called the Brahmo Samaj, which I mentioned previously in the previous chapter. And one of the presidents of that Samaj, and it's an important Samaj actually for Hinduism, because Hinduism had become quite ritualistic, and so this Samaj accepted some tenets, the most profound, the simple aspects of Hinduism, that the meditational temperament and things like that, and took away ritualistic stuff and things that essentially don't fit with modern day scientific sort of thinking. So Rabindranath Tagore's father, who was Devendranath Tagore, was also a president of this society. So there's another link there. So the first president was a chap called Keshav Chandra Sen. And he and Ramakrishna Paramahansa would often meet and discuss topics of, religion and philosophy and things like that. And he obviously had a profound influence on him. So Ramakrishna had a profound influence on many people, as it would appear. But Keshav Chandra Sen, essentially, he started accepting Christ in the Brahmo Samaj, and he established his own kind of organization after that. But he was saying that in one of his addresses, he said, Jesus Christ to Europe and Asia, he proclaimed that in India would be for Christ alone, who already stalks the land. And then he basically paved the way to embrace Christianity without necessarily losing any part of his religion. So there was that. So I think the contemporaries, we're going to talk about it a bit later, the contemporaries of that time, they essentially really started exploring this avenue of like the mystical teachings of Christ. And we know that Lahiri Mahashaya did as well at the time, but it's not so well documented as it is with Ramakrishna's contemporaries. Mike?
I just want to ask you, Priyanka, what do you think is the situation of this right now? And also, you mentioned Christianity, and somehow Hinduism seems to be this kind of religion that just absorbs masters, right? So you can probably follow Christ and still be a Hindu. Is that a thing at all, or is that
Yeah, that's
Or
very much a thing. Very much a thing,
Yeah.
and I can't. Obviously, it's conjecture to say when that begun, which is what I'm kind of suggesting here, just looking at through the annals of records of Christianity and in India, and when non-Christians started accepting Christianity and without losing their faith. This seems to be about the time. But this is the case for Orthodox Hindus. So many many simple simple Hindus, everyday communal in rural India, they would freely accept Christ and his teachings as another prophet, just as you've mentioned, or as a saint, and not necessarily need to leave their religion. But they didn't get any spotlight because obviously they're just everyday folk. But this Brahmo Samaj and the spin-off organizations had a very broad reach. It had a lot of, like, Bengal at the time was obviously the pinnacle of empire, British India. So it had quite a lot of what do you say, pull in terms of the Western eye. So if they started doing it, then the rest of India started to kind of notice. Chris?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, this, because we know from Yogananda's book, The Yoga of Jesus, Understanding the Hidden Teachings of the Gospels, there's a lot unpacked there. And it's not only Yogananda's work, but lots of other scholarly work done on Jesus having traveled, in his missing years in the Bible to the East, traveling eastward and picking up a lot of the teachings of yoga and so on. And his name really, different to what we know as Jesus, that he went by, was, revered around many parts for which he traveled as a genius. He was a genius and could pick up a lifetime of teaching in a matter of days or weeks. And he made a great impression. So now that we're talking about it, it is actually funny how he isn't a bigger name in India, because he really went and sort of picked up a lot of his teachings and understandings and brought them back to his land.
But you probably just consider him as like a yogi mystic. He's not necessarily one of a separate tribe or religion. So that for the 2,000 years since today, and since Christ was in India, you needn't think of him as not one of your own. So you don't. It's only, I think, it's only a recent thing, all this us and them and me, my faith and your faith, isn't it? Back in those days, it was just truth and physics, metaphysics, and experience with divine and devotion. And whereas now it's become very war-centric, because since Christ, lots of religions have started using religion to justify war, isn't it? Mike?
Yes. Yeah, I don't think Christ at the time when he was in India had established any organization there, right? At least there's no real indication of that. It was more like once his life came to an end, he told his disciples to go all over the world and establish something. But it was also a very, very dark age. And then India has, in a very high frequency, saints who create big influential organizations, right? So guessing it, I think there is the Apostle Thomas who went to India, right? He went to the south, and over there's a big Christian community, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Before even it came to Europe, apparently. Western Europe, anyway. So yeah, let's move on. Enough talk, conjecture. But Christlike is the title that Guruji loves to use. He's used it for Lady Mahashaya, and he used it before this chapter, of course, and he used it for his own guru. I think it's literally in the first paragraph and when he talks about Sri Yukteswar as well. So it's all over Guruji's work, isn't it? Christlike. This is again another mention of it. So I think if ever he says Christ-like, I think we have to turn our heads and notice who he's talking about. And Ramakrishna Paramahansa is in that esteemed category. So the two, Master Mahashaya and Mukunda, they said they go to the Kalima temple in Dakshineswar, which is what we'll talk about next. Apparently, is 4 miles away from their home. And we talked about the Kali temple in a previous episode in detail, so we won't do that again. But here it says that describes the altar and the idols there. That Divine Mother is standing on Shiva's Shiva, essentially, which is quite a thing. Again, we've discussed that in the past, so we won't go there. And the 1,000-petaled lotus is mentioned here. Again, the one that we should aspire to in our meditation to touch, which is quite nice. And then it says that Master Mahashaya beamed in enchantment. Essentially, he was engaged automatically or straight away in an inexhaustible romance with the beloved, which is quite profound. The way that this romance is written, before I'd read the autobiography or Guruji's work, romance I'd only I'd only associate romance with the physical, relationship between two people, and marriage and things like that. But this, the divine romance, as Guruji has got a book, Cosmic Romance, I think is is such a great spin, isn't it, on that mundane, otherwise mundane word and concept. So I really like the way he's described that inexhaustible romance with the beloved, as Master Mahashaya was. So it kind of implies that he was in a state of Samadhi. And later in the next paragraph, Mukunda also kind of by law of magnetism and attraction, and that conduction of Samadhi seems to translate also to Mukunda, which is quite nice. So the two of them in a very supernal state. So again, he's Master Mahashaya and Mukunda there, and it says here that he chanted her name. As he chanted her name, my enraptured heart seemed shattered like the lotus into 1,000 pieces. And this essentially, again, is quite similar to how young Ramakrishna Paramahansa, how he kind of, looked at the birds and he kind of melted away into the soil, isn't it, Mike?
And Guruji himself also has a special connection to Divine Mother, right? Like whenever through his life, when he said he was sending intense prayers, he oftentimes says he's directing them at Divine Mother or the Mother aspect of God. So in that sense, Master Mahashaya and Guruji, they're in sync. They have a similar approach to God that way.
Yes, indeed. I very much love Divine Mother, all three of these.
Mm-hmm.
So then they strolled through the temple precincts, and these precincts were very much hallowed by Ramakrishna Paramahansa. So it's a very holy site because he spent so much time there, which is not so common, as it were. He spent the majority of his life in those four walls and those adjacent buildings. So I can't wait to go there later this year. Okay. So they halted at a tamarisk grove. Now the tamarix is a tree that has got a lot of links to Egypt, Bible, and India. The flowers are used to make garlands because they're very, very fragrant. So this tree and its flowers have got very deep spiritual links in terms of devotion and what they mean. So that's quite nice. And you could say that that tree kind of influences what happens next, because Ramakrishna Paramahansa no doubt also loved that tree, and it was probably alive at that time. So what happens next is that the mana, or it's kind of like a energy, is the word for like an energy, characteristically exuded by the tree, was symbolic of the heavenly food Master Mahashaya was bestowing. Really beautiful. And they sat rigidly in that state amidst the flowers, as is described here. And then Mukunda says he became temporarily absent from the body and soared in a supernal visit. So both of them, one after the other, just in and out of probably Mukunda was probably in Savikalpa Samadhi, and Master Mahashaya Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So there you go. Chris?
We've talked about it before, where we've said that Yogananda is very, very good at teaching, and he's able to give information kind of drip feed or slowly, and he won't labor a point, but he's making so many points as he goes. Just, it's so artistic. So it says, I sat rigidly motionless. And to me, I remember when I first read this, I probably wouldn't really have understood why that's significant, rigidly motionless. But now, having gone through the teachings, many years later, I understand why he really used the descriptions that he did here as well. Just to kind of highlight that, because he's sort of planting the seeds as he goes along and kind of moves along nicely without touching on it.
Do you guys feel that saying temporarily absent from the body is a bit of a casual way of saying that you're in a really high state? Like, it's like his version of like a low-key flex. Like, that's what I did. I temporarily left the body, and yeah.
But this is what I'm touching on myself is it's humble. He doesn't. He could make such a big deal out of talking about work, but it's so artistic, it's so graceful, and it just effortlessly glides through this moment in time. And we're sitting here maybe scratching our heads for the first time reading this, thinking, what does this mean? And then this is what the spark of divinity within us sort of is curious then to go after the truth in this. So it does it so effortlessly. It's lovely.
Indeed.
Yeah, key flex. I like it.
Indeed. Temporarily is an important word there, because I mentioned Savikalpa Samadhi. That is the one experience in that ecstatic state where the devotee experiences the bliss of God but is unable to remain there, whereas Nirvikalpa can sustain that state in or out of meditation eternally through time. So that temporary word is a good one. So let's talk about how Ramakrishna Paramahansa is mentioned by Guruji and how it's related to his Samadhi. So, as in Ramakrishna Paramahansa's Samadhi. So in God Talks with Arjuna, chapter 7, verse 24, my wife and I were debating this concept about God being unmanifest or manifest, the ultimate form of God. But Guruji here is describing this in this chapter. In the description, Guruji describes what Ramakrishna Paramahansa had to go through. He said, a great master, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, who saw God constantly as Mother Kali, conversing often with her, later said, I had to destroy that finite form of my mother with the sword of wisdom to behold her as the formless infinite. Now, this is quite profound. Destroying Divine Mother, you think it would be blasphemy. But through reading the Gospel of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, I found, I think, the exact section that Guruji is referring to. So I'm quite sure that Guruji would have read this book because it was quite a famous book. So, Chris, if you'd like to read what this is in the book and what the bigger story is about this.
Sure.
So this is Ramakrishna Paramahansa talking here.
A saint asked me to withdraw the mind completely from all objects and dive deep into the Atman. But in spite of all my attempts, I could not altogether cross the realm of name and form and bring my mind to the unconditioned state. I had no difficulty in taking the mind from all the objects of the world, but the radiant and too familiar figure of the blissful mother, the embodiment of the essence of pure consciousness, appeared before me as a living reality. Her bewitching smile prevented me from passing on to the great beyond. Again and again I tried, but she stood in my way every time. In despair, I said no.
To Nanta. Nanta is who's the saint that he's speaking to.
I said, no, Nanta, it is hopeless. I cannot raise my mind to the unconditioned state and come face to face with Atman. He grew excited and sharply said, what? You can't do it? But you have to. He cast his eyes around. Finding a piece of glass, he took it up and struck it between my eyebrows. Concentrate the mind on this point, he thundered. Then, with stern determination, I again sat to meditate. As soon as the gracious form of the Divine Mother appeared before me, I used my discrimination as a sword, and with it clove her in two. The last barrier fell. My spirit at once soared beyond the relative plane, and I lost myself in Samadhi.
Well, quite violent, isn't it? So Guruji wasn't mixing his words when he described this, that he had to destroy, he had to destroy the form. And this is quite violent. You imagine striking someone over the head with a glass, even if it isn't, you would dare not to do it in spiritual life. But obviously this Saint Nanda knew very well what he was doing. Chris, what do you think?
Okay, well, can I just share something maybe sort of personal to me?
Oh, yeah.
Myself, which is sometimes in meditation, I used to years ago, and I still do sometimes, would be in meditation when thoughts come, I would carve them like a samurai sword. I would carve them. They just, disintegrate into nothing. And I thought, gosh, this is maybe a bit violent. Just like slicing all thoughts, because sometimes they're thoughts of, good things, people and family, and I'm cutting them with knives or something. But I relate to it now, in essence, because it's wisdom. It's not literal. It's metaphorical. Weapon of wisdom. So I feel better. No, thank you for reading that, Greg.
I have the picture now of thoughts coming to you, and you play Fruit Ninja with them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I think it's a really good point that they both make here, because when sometimes you sit down and meditate and you think of an experience, I don't know if you guys ever have that, but sometimes my idea of an experience would be that Guruji comes to me as the person Guruji or something, and I see him. But when Guruji describes Samadhi in his amazing poem, right, it's not that at all, right? It's like the whole concept of the world deconstructs in front of you, right, and of yourself. And I guess that's what he's pointing to here as well. Like you have that image of the Divine Mother, but really what that divine experience is much more profound.
Indeed. So let's move on. So the next section is really a much bigger section about Divine Mother. And I'm reminded of Master's cosmic chants, Divine Mother everywhere stays. So the next section is that they had many pilgrimages to this holy temple. And Guruji was very fortunate to have the grace and physical presence of this Master Mahashaya. And he says that from him he learned the sweetness of God in the aspect of the Divine Mother or Divine Mercy, which is quite nice. And he says here something which is, I think, distinguishes Divine Mother from the Father. He says, the childlike saint found little appeal in the Father aspect or divine justice. So Divine Mercy would be Divine Mother, Divine Justice would be Divine Father. Divine Father would therefore be stern, exacting, mathematical judgment. And he said that was alien to the Master Mahashaya. So, Mike?
I found that interesting because I don't know why. Maybe that's my kind of a tendency in me, but I always thought you need to like all the aspects. You cannot say I like this one and not this one. But then he does, and it worked for him. So I guess that's also there. There isn't just one way to God, right? There's different ways, and you have to find the one that works best for you. And you don't have to be equally good at all of them, right? And for me, this was a bit of a revelation when I read that.
Which do you guys prefer, this Divine Mercy or Divine Justice? I think it'll obviously be no surprise to both of you that I'm a stern, exacting, and mathematical judgment type.
Definitely not that. Yeah, definitely more of a mercy guy. Yeah.
I'm whenever I do my the services, and when you have the prayer, you can always it's within your gift to choose Divine Mother, help me, or to Heavenly Father, help me. I'm always the latter. Chris, which are you?
I thought you were gearing the question up to, which would you prefer having exacted onto you? Their question entirely, because depending on what mood you might simply wish for the mercy rather than the justice. But I've been told too many times that I'm very very much too much on the latter side, the stern and exacting. But I'm
2-1, Mike. You're outnumbered today.
No,
that's all right.
But it's because maybe there's some balance needed, right? And this is the age of mercy, right? We're kind of coming into seeing a lot more of that in the world. In the last 100 years, and maybe the last 1,000.
Well, as you call it 2-2, seeing as the section we're reading is clearly preferring Divine Mother, so we'll call it 2-2 draw.
Or 3-2. We get Guruji and Mahasamadhi.
Call it 3-all. I hope Lauren really got to.
I know which one would be.
Which one would you be?
Divine Mercy. Sure.
Yeah, true.
Oh, 4-2. Okay, wow.
What number?
It's not even a competition anymore.
Gosh. So then Guruji says that. Actually, before he says that, let's relate some stories from Ramakrishna Paramahansa about his relationship with Divine Mother. So he, as we mentioned, his wife became quite exalted, and after Ramakrishna Paramahansa passed, his wife then became that kind of symbol of Divine Mother, and she was very much adored, and people would go seek her for darshan. And Mukunda himself, according to Swami Satyananda, his childhood friend, in his book, Biography of Yogananda, he actually went and took darshan of Sarada Devi. So let's hear some of Ramakrishna Paramahansa's experiences of Divine Mother and his wife, and how he involved her in this worship at the temple. So, Mike, if you'd like to read this section from the Gospel of Ramakrishna Paramahansa.
Sri Ramakrishna and his wife lived together at Dakshineswar, but their minds always soared above the worldly plane. A few months after Sarada Devi's arrival, Sri Ramakrishna arranged on an auspicious day a special worship of Kali, the Divine Mother. Instead of an image of the deity, he placed on the seat the living image, Sarada Devi herself. The worshipper and the worshipped went into deep samadhi, and in the transcendental plane, their souls were united. After several hours, Sri Ramakrishna came down again to the relative plane, sang a hymn to the great goddess, and surrendered at the feet of the living image, himself, his rosary, and the fruit of his lifelong sadhana. This is known in Tantra as the Sodasi Puja, Shodasi Puja, the adoration of women or of woman. Sri Ramakrishna realized the significance of the great statement of the Upanishad, O Lord, thou art the woman, thou art the man, thou art the boy, thou art the girl, thou art the old, tottering on their crutches, thou pervadest the universe in its multiple forms.
Quite a beautiful experience that many Hindus wouldn't practice this tantra. They might even consider it quite blasphemous. But one of the divine realization of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, obviously known as the underlying divinity in his wife and all humanity. But here, I think the words that you use that are being used here and the kind of philosophy is. I hope you can get the tinge of why there's such a big link between Ramakrishna Paramahansa and his, disciples like Vivekananda, who's mentioned in the autobiography many times, and Self-Realization Fellowship and Yogananda, because some of these words are very, the concepts are very, very similar, aren't they? I mean, Master's even got a chant that's similar to this last line that Mike read out, thou art a woman, thou art the man, thou art the boy, thou art the art. Just saying all the things that God is. And it's quite a beautiful conception of Divine Mother, isn't it? or the Heavenly Father, whichever way you tend to lean. And another very beautiful example in the life of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, which Chris, hopefully you can read out. So here, this is, we're going to fast forward. Later on, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Ramakrishna's latter phases of his life. So he, before he passed, he had quite a severe throat illness. So was suffering a lot, physically suffering a lot. But here, this beautiful story. Chris, if you'd like to read it.
Pandit Shashidhar one day suggested to the master that the latter could remove the illness by concentrating his mind on the throat, the scriptures having declared that yogis had power to cure themselves in that way. The master rebuked the Pandit. For a scholar like you to make such a proposal, he said, how can I withdraw the mind from the lotus feet of God and turn it to this worthless cage of flesh and blood? For our sake at least, begged Narendra and the other disciples. But, replied Sri Ramakrishna, do you think I enjoy this suffering? I wish to recover, but that depends on the mother.
So profound. Narendra, by the way, is Vivekananda. So before he became a Swami. So here, this is another example where Ramakrishna Paramahansa, under no circumstances would he leave his elevated state. So this is interesting here because this Pandit asks him to focus on the throat chakra, the Vishuddhi chakra, right? And from there he can manifest the power to heal the throat, which is there. And then the Ramakrishna Paramahansa says, how can I for a second turn away from the lotus feet of God and turn it to this cage of flesh and blood? So where is his focus at all times? It must be at the highest Sahasrara chakra, right? For him to come down to the throat would mean that he'd have to come out of his state of of bliss. So even, the most horrific illness, he won't allow for a second to come down, which is quite nice. I love that he says he compared the state that he's in, and then to come down, he said, to the worthless cage of flesh and blood. So I think that I really took that one to heart recently. I was in Turkey with my friends, and they all got a massage, and they're like, "Why don't you come?" I was like, "No, this body's not worth the effort." I essentially said something along these words in a bit more of a harsh way. They were a bit shocked. Yeah.
What did you do?
What I do? I did my asanas. I did my yoga asanas whilst I had that massage. I'd say mine was probably more healing than theirs. Anyway,
it is quite shocking commentary, really, isn't it? That if you're maybe not trying to attune yourself with what is really being said, you might think of it as quite disrespectful to the manifestation of the humanly form, which allows us to get to God. You might take it wrongly, but I think really the point here is to say, he can do these things, but he's trying to make the bigger point of where our attention should be, as you rightly said, Frank. So I think it's specifically designed to be shocking, right? Could have easily chose other words.
And he's leaving everything to Divine Mother, isn't it? He says at the end, "I wish to recover." Obviously, everyone wants physical comfort and health. No one wants pain and suffering. But he says that depends on the mother. So even though he's completely at one with the mother, and he can ask her for whatever he wants, and it will be granted, just as Master Mahashaya was saying whatever he wants, and it was being granted, and we'll find that more examples of that later in this chapter. But he's leaving it to her. This illness, this physical illness, is a manifestation of the burning of karma, most likely of his disciples, which we'll read a little bit more about later. So he's leaving it all to Mother. The next and the last section that we'll discuss here is that he says, Master Mahashaya says, "My mother told me so." It's completely out of the blue. There's no context to this, but it feels like it just feels like that this is kind of a mantra for him. He would just say it. So the words, essentially his philosophies and the outlook, essentially none of it is his own. He's just he's attributing all the praise and his devotion and his everything to his master, which is quite beautiful. And Yogananda says that shrinking from personal assertion, the saint usually ended his sage counsel with this tribute. And this his whole life story as to how long he spent with Ramakrishna Paramahansa and how long he spent writing the Gospel of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, certainly the testimony to this. He's literally doing the bidding to the last second of his life of his guru, which is quite beautiful. And then Mukunda then says that, or Paramahansa Yogananda reflects and says that so deep was his sense of identity that with Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa that Master Mahashaya no longer considered his thoughts to be his own. That is profound. That is how deep it can go if you really let the Guruji, the Guru in your conscious life and thoughts. And then he can act through you, and you can then be the perfect instrument, as Master Mahashaya was being, especially for young Mukunda, whom he knew what Mukunda's destiny was, and no doubt all these experiences he's giving him to just accelerate his growth, and so he can remember his eternal position, what he experiences with when he meets his guru Sri Yukteswar in the next chapter. He's just being the catalyst, isn't he, to enable that to happen. So this last line, I've got because we know that he spent, it's a 1,000-page book, this Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, but there's some interesting reflections if you read the book of how Ramakrishna Paramahansa also played a hand in Master Mahashaya's life. So, Mike, if you'd like to read this section from the Gospel.
Swami Shivananda, a direct disciple of the Master and the second president of the Ramakrishna Math and Mission, says on this topic, whenever there was an interesting talk, the Master would call Master Mahashaya if he was not in the room and then draw his attention to the holy words spoken. We did not know then why the Master did so. Now we can realize that this action of the Master had an important significance, for it was reserved for Master Mahashaya to give to the world at large the sayings of the Master.
Mm. So Master Mahashaya, all his life, would keep a journal and a diary of positive thoughts, and he meticulously recorded everything, and this is what the book is. So Ramakrishna Paramahansa knew, essentially, he presaged the importance of this humble little journal that Master Mahashaya was keeping and the wealth of treasure that it would provide for generations to come. And he played the role. it would appear that he paused what he was saying. Oh, he's not here. Master Mahashaya is not here. Bring him. And everyone's like, why? Carry on. But Master Mahashaya, it would have been, no doubt, very, very difficult to capture Ramakrishna Paramahansa's dialogue. And he would have used shorthand, which Dayamata talks about using, and Mrinalini Mata talks about using, because they were very good at it. But the best at it was Taramata. And Paramahansa Yogananda used to say, she gets me, and he used to tell us to use her example and to get inside my thoughts. He used to tell Dayamata and Mrinalini Mata. So I feel that Master Mahashaya and Dayamata must have some parallel karma that linked somehow. Mike, sorry.
That's like what you have to organize the incarnation of a saint, right? And then you always have to incarnate the right note taker, scribe with you, right? Who can then later preserve your knowledge. And otherwise, it is a monumental task, like you said here, right? It's so much work, and we know with SRF how much work it is to take all the writings of Yogananda and publish them into books and be a good custodian of this. So if you would have to have the Master doing it himself, he would be occupied so much by just doing that, right? So he wouldn't have enough time to do other things.
And there was so much training in that for Dharamata and Mrinalini Mata, wasn't there? Because to get inside Guruji's thoughts would essentially then you'd have to be at one with Guru, and that's essentially the goal of all of our sadhana. So it's quite nice, and it's also quite nice to do this project that we're doing, because that's essentially what we're doing.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we don't have this huge weight of responsibility as Dharamata and Master Mahashaya did for the dissemination of the teachings. We're doing it at our leisure.
Yes, I was going to say I don't want to put myself on the level with Master Mahashaya or any of those. They are illumined masters that were chosen to do this. Yeah.
Indeed. So that's quite nice. So we've talked much about the links of Ramakrishna Paramahansa and the history of the people involved with self-realization fellowship. So I thought I would go through some examples of this and why it's relevant. So firstly, the very important reading for this is Swami Satyananda's book, a collection of biographies of the four Kriya Yoga Gurus. And one of them is one of the gurus that Swami Satyananda writes about. And Swami Satyananda, if you remember, is Mukunda's high school friend, and he also was the principal teacher for the Ranchi school for many decades, devotionally serving him. And so, yeah, he's a reliable source, shall we say. And he also, one of the biographies he wrote was about Swami Sri Yukteswar. And Swami Sri Yukteswar, in his early years as a monk, really wanted to, establish ashram or ashrams. And he said that Swami Sri Yukteswar, who was a contemporary of Vivekananda, used to really praise Vivekananda, towards his attitude of nationality and service, and he used to mingle with Vivekananda, Brahmananda, and Shivananda, all presidents of the Ramakrishna mission. And he even, Swami Satyananda says, before forming his own Sadhu Sabha, which was his ashram organization before the one that we know about, he approached Brahmananda for the possibility of making the Satsanga Sangha, which was one of his previous organizations, a part of Ramakrishna mission, but with his own mission and methodology. And we don't know why, but that did not transpire. But had it have transpired, who knows what their self-realization fellowship would be, and how our links with Ramakrishna Paramahansa's mission would be. But it's very interesting. And Swami Satyananda even said that he used to tell Mukunda and the others to read Vivekananda's books because of his profound concepts and faith. And if you read Vivekananda's work, I'm sure you'd agree that it's a beautiful thing to do. So there's that link. That's a strong link. The other strong link is Shastri Mahashaya, who also served in the Ranchi school as one of the teachers, and in his path he was fortunate to have the presence, be in the presence and take the blessings from Ramakrishna Paramahansa, and Trelanga Swami and others such as that also were in that time and walked the same soil. So there's that element. And Shastri Mahashaya is also another one of the biographies of the four that Swami Satyananda talks about. And the other link is, I mentioned earlier that young Mukunda did have the grace and the darshan of Sarada Devi, who was Ramakrishna Paramahansa's wife. And during some of their meditations, he used to keep a picture of Ramakrishna Paramahansa and organize prayers, with Divine Mother, and Master Mahashaya would facilitate those, which is quite nice. Then there's also Ramakrishna Paramahansa also enjoyed meeting various sannyasis that would also have influenced Sri Yukteswar and others at the time as well. So there's that, because he had quite a large reach, shall we say. And Mukunda's older sister's husband was a disciple and a follower of Ramakrishna Paramahansa's organization, so there's that. And apparently a lot of his other teachers in the Ranchi school were from that organization, which is, so there's quite a lot of link there. And later in chapter 47 of the chapter, we have a direct discussion about Vivekananda and the silver cup, which we're going to talk about a lot later in the book. But Mukunda also, Swami Satyananda says, very much loved Vivekananda and used to study his teachings. So, as I'm sure you'll agree, there's many dotted lines. I'd say more with this organization than with any other organization that I can think of. Could stand to be corrected. Listeners, do comment if you think there are other organizations that we have deeper ties to. But yeah. So next, I thought we'd end with just talking about the last stages of Ramakrishna Paramahansa's life. and his Mahasamadhi. So usually, and this is true for Guruji as well, the Guru takes on the karma of his disciples, right? And he even in this case, actually, it's described in the Gospel that he actually gave Swami Vivekananda, or Narendra as he was then, everything that he was. So he literally handed over the spiritual baton. So not just So this last section, we're just going to talk about how Ramakrishna Paramahansa left, essentially. So, Chris, would you like to start us off? And as we said, this was at a time where he was suffering from a very severe throat illness.
Sure. Though he followed the physician's directions regarding medicine and diet, he could neither control his trances nor withhold from seekers the solace of his advice. Sometimes, like a sulky child, he would complain to the mother about the crowds who gave him no rest, day or night. He was overheard to say to her, "Why do you bring me here with all these worthless people who are like milk diluted with 5 times its own quantity of water? My eyes are almost destroyed with blowing the fire to dry up the water. My health is gone. It is beyond my strength. Do it yourself if you want it done." This, pointing to his own body, is but a perforated drum, and if you go on beating it day in and day out, how long will it last?
Such a sweet dialogue between Master and Divine Mother, isn't it? Or Ramakrishna Paramahansa. And it very much reminds me of Mukunda when he has this dialogue with Divine Mother. Yeah, Mike, do you want to carry on?
But his large heart never turned anyone away. He said, "Let me be condemned to be born over and over again, even in the form of a dog, if I can be of help to a single soul." And he bore the pain, singing cheerfully, "Let the body be preoccupied with illness, but O mind, dwell forever in God's bliss."
Sri Ramakrishna was sinking day by day. His diet was reduced to a minimum, and he found it almost impossible to swallow. He whispered to Mother.
No, to Master Mahashaya.
Sorry, to Master Mahashaya. "I am bearing all this cheerfully, for otherwise you would be weeping. If you all say that it is better that the body should go rather than suffer this torture, I am willing."
So you can just see he's really just hanging on just to burn the last of the karma of his disciples. Must have been so hard for them to see that, isn't it? And even Guruji was very much suffering the last few weeks, the heavy burden. So I'll just read the last section here, unless anyone's got any other points about Ramakrishna that they would make. No, I know we'll end it with this last section then. So, in spite of the physician's effort and the prayers and nursing of his devotees, the illness rapidly progressed. The pain sometimes appeared to be unbearable. The master lived only on liquid fruit, and his frail body was becoming a mere skeleton. Yet his face always radiated joy, and he continued to welcome the visitors pouring in to receive his blessing. When certain zealous devotees tried to keep the visitors away, they were told, "You cannot succeed in it. He has been born for this very purpose, to sacrifice himself for the redemption of others."